All right, data management tools. All right, there are a number of different tools which are available to allow us to automate these processes. There are import wizards, and there are web service API-based tools. And we're going to talk about both of those, all right? All right, so we're going to perform some integration. So all of this is basically we have our legacy HR system, and it has position, candidate, job application data, and we want to move that into Salesforce. And so we're going to talk about the different tools that we have available to do that. Okay. Like I said, there are two types of tools. The first one are import wizards, which also do exports. And these are web browser-based tools. Okay, so over here in my setup menu, if I scroll down to data management, for instance, I could click on either import custom objects or data export in order to use these web-based tools. So I could go like so, use these web browser-based tools in order to import a bunch of data. Okay. What it is it's a wizard. It walks you through. It says, okay, identify the, tell me about, go out and locate the CSV file. What object do you want to upload? And it walks you through the process of basically uploading files through the wizard using a CSV file. All right. There are a limited number of objects that it works with, although it does support all custom objects. And then there's also Web Services API. So the Web Services API, there are a number of tools that we have at our disposal that utilize the Web Services API, or we could code our own tool that would then upload the data using that mechanism. So two different tools, two different types, or I should say categories of tools. All right. The import wizard has the benefit of being browser-based. It's like I said, it's a wizard. The limitations are it only uploads 50,000 records or less. Other tools are able to handle many more. It also has some default deduplication logic above and beyond what we were talking about with respect to IDs. So for instance, account name and site, account IDs, and so on and so forth for those standard objects. Okay. The API tools allow a greater number of objects in terms of inserts, updates, upserts, whatever. A greater number of object support. By the way, if you want to know, well, what objects are supported by the API, the document that you would want to look at for the definitive answers, there's a separate document called the Web Services API Developers Guide, and that has a lot of information about the different standard objects and the way that they work.
Those PDFs that you refer to are always available for us in the website?
Yeah, so the majority of them, almost all of them, are available from developer.force.com. Just go to developer.force.com, click on, there's a link for documentation, and then there's a link to HTML versions and PDF versions. The one exception I want to point out is the user guide. Where do we download the PDF version of the user guide from? No, not community. It might be up there actually, but
help and training link.
Exactly. Go to help and training, click on the help tab, and then there is a link for the PDF. So that's the this is the one that's over 2,000 pages and 17 megabytes. So it's good if you have a long flight back to Turkey, for instance. I recommend it. So. Which direction are you going around the world?
That's in Spanish, right?
There are other, yes. So there are other languages that are available. And I'm trying to think of, yeah.
Spanish, French, German, maybe
Yeah,
Japanese.
There's other languages. It's not true of all of our documentation. The user guide has much more, language support, because that's the one that the end users, that's the most popular document that end users are using possibly. The ability to load more than 50,000 records, so much larger volumes. You can also, because it is you could schedule these. So you could either write your own program, which a scheduler launches it, or you could do something where you we have a tool called Data Loader, which uses the Web Services API. That runs in a command line mode, and therefore we could create a cron job or something like that that fires off the batch file on a nightly basis or something like that. You can also export, but that's also true of the wizards. You can also export there. Mass delete. So, all right. Data Loader is a fully supported tool. One of the advantages of Data Loader is that it not only supports comma-separated value files as the input and the output, it also supports integration to a database via JDBC. So you can configure it to actually connect to a database using a JDBC driver if you don't want to go to the intermediary of the comma-separated values. It also supports doing the external IDs when you're performing the upserts. So more advanced, everything we've talked about with respect to the upserts with relationships, that's not really done in the import wizard. It's not that complex, but this does support that. Then it can be run, so Data Loader can be run from the command line and therefore is scriptable. You can write it on a nightly batch, something like that. Data Loader, by the way, is a Web Service API-based tool. So all the stuff I talked about with Web Service API, it uses the Web Service API to get the data in there. All right. Yes, it is written in Java. You can download Data Loader by going to Data Management, and then there's a link for Data Loader. It is already installed on your systems, but in the future, if you'd like to download it, you can go out here to Data Management, and then the final link is Data Loader, and from here we can download the latest version. Like I said, it's got docs, fully supported. It's something you can call support on. In addition, what else was I going to say? There's the out at SourceForge. There is a project whereby you can download an open source version of Data Loader. So if you'd like to reuse some of the logic or something like that, this is not a supported version though. In addition, I've also noticed that somebody ported the Data Loader, the Java, over to Mac, and so they created it's once again unsupported, but somebody created a Mac version of Data Loader. So yeah. It's not on the App Exchange. There's a fellow, the developer who had the 5,000 posts on developer.com, Mr. Fell. He has a website called Pocket Soap. Here's his website. He links to this in all of his posts. Yeah, so here's his Mac OS 10 build of the Data Loader application. So, a lot of people will put stuff out there. There's some good blogs out there, not just on developer.force.com. It's a great place to go because there's usually a hub where they link to outside blogs. So, but here's his website. So,
Chris,
yes.
From what I've heard up to now, I think that whatever tool we use, we are bound to the limits of the internet access we have.
You're bound to the limits of what?
Internet access.
Internet access.
The bandwidth that we have. For example, in Turkey, if you want to load gigabytes of data, for example, millions of activities
Yeah.
to the server, it will be impossible with our current the corporate bandwidth that we have.
Okay.
So what do you provide as a solution in those situations? We can send you the
everything. I'm gonna get a thumb drive in the email or in the mail one of these days. No, we're really, it's all internet based. Now, one of the things that we do, for instance, in Data Loader is that we actually don't insert, like let's say you have 100,000 records and you're going to insert 100,000 records. We don't insert 100,000 records at once. We insert them in chunks of 200 at most. So it's not like a single operation occurs in which 100,000 records at once. It does chunk it into 200 separate calls. Now I don't know if that addresses, are these a daily bandwidth limit or is this a...
No, we have a VPN connection to the Basel server, so we have to have a limited connection because we don't use the internet, independent internet connection. So our, I think, connection is 2 megabits or 4 megabits nowadays, and for example, for UK affiliate, for millions of activities, it will take more time than I can probably see. At the end, maybe my grandsons will see that the data.
You'll have to fly over here.
I'm not sure what to tell you because we, everything that we're doing, is using that web services and therefore is internet based. I don't know of, something like a service where you sent in, like a hard drive or something like that they would do something like that. I don't know what to tell you. I can maybe look. I can look, but I'm not sure what to tell you.
If you can come up with a solution that will require me to come again to San Francisco, it would be great.
Same happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, our data center is located in Hawaii, and so
it's even better.
let me. I'll search see if I can find something. Yeah. Yeah.
A related question about this issue. What happens when a user is in the middle of a transaction and you lose your internet connection, or you have a power blackout?
Okay.
What happens when you restore your login? What happens with that transaction? Do you lose it?
Well, what is the user doing? Is this user logged into via the web browser, or are they logged in to web services API, or like what can you define what this is?
Let's say on a regular basis, let's suppose they are inputting a purchase order in Salesforce.
Using the web browser. It's, let's see, so your internet connection goes down. What happens? Well, here's my new job application. And I am now disconnected from the internet. And so assuming that I entered in some data, so this is going to fail. So you still have the form. There's I think there's a cookie identifying your session. So if I now came out here and looks like I'm connected, let's just test this out by opening a link in a new tab. That worked. So now if I perform this, now I keep going. So
how about if you're doing mass upload through API?
Well, like I said, it does it in chunks of 200. So it's going to be separate. It's going to be committing in chunks of 200 as you go along. So if you're doing 100,000 and it fails halfway through, you at least have 50,000 committed to the database. But then the the next one's going to fail, and you're going to need to restart. You know, I think there's some sort of, you know, if you're losing data loader, for instance, there's a success and an errors file telling you what were the last ones loaded in.
So it knows where to pick up.
Yeah. And if you're doing something like an insert, I know that if you're using the auto number field, or I'm sorry, auto number type on a name field, one of the things that people have done is they would go into their definition, they go, okay, let's take a look at the last created object, and then they go in and sometimes update the start number for the auto number to reflect that, stuff like that. So.
Or they have a flag that says uploaded or something like that too.
Yeah.
But
so, yeah, go ahead.
Does the Salesforce have some sort of like message queuing?
Message queuing.
Where
No.
it queues all the messages sent to it?
Not really, because we're using, I mean, Data Loader is a client program. It's using web services. It's a synchronous connection in terms of, you know, constantly shuttling those over. So it's not an asynchronous queuing system per se, but it would get that, I think it would get that failure at some point, and then you just receive a bunch of errors, and then you need to restart it, but you need to restart at the next, you know, sort of level. So, okay. All right, so let's keep moving on here. Okay, deciding which tool to use. So you have a choice of using the import wizards or the web services API-based tools. It depends on what type of operations you want to perform in terms of things like that upsert with relationships. It depends on the objects involved. The web services API-based tools support more standard objects. They both support all custom objects. Depends on your scheduling needs. In other words, if you want to run this unassisted at 3 a.m. or something like that, the web services tools don't require a user sitting in a web browser, so you can do that. Depends on your deduping needs. This is one point in the import wizard column because they have additional deduping logic. Depends on the number of records involved. If it's greater than 50,000, then you have to go the web services route. And then depends on the data sources and destinations. So what are we talking about? Well, remember that the data loader, for instance, supports JDBC connections. So they both support CSV, but only data loader supports the JDBC. Okay. All right. Who did I leave off on? I think Anu, is it your turn? It's Chris's turn. Okay. Can you import data into custom objects using the import wizard?
I hope so.
You hope so. You hope right. So yes, you can. How do you decide which import tool to use?
You go back to the previous slide.
Yeah. So you're just going to say it depends? So these are the things that I just talked about, the different types of operations, the object support. All of these are kind of in the column of the web service API except for that deduping. So, true or false, an external ID field is always unique. Chris?
False.
That is false. It is not always unique. External ID and require uniqueness are two different settings. Okay.
Chris, can we go one back slide and again say this depends things? So, for example, the duping needs, I think both of them will, there are three, but in fact there are, in logic there are two ways, API and web-based. The web-based one and the API-based one both prevents the duplicates, right?
Yeah, I think just in different ways. The wizard has some additional logic for taking a look at some fields other than, for instance, the ID or the external ID. So taking a look at, for instance, account name and some other stuff to identify a duplicate.
But only for the standards.
For the import wizard. Yeah.
What about the objects involved? Both of them.
Yeah, so there's greater support for standard objects within the web services API. So like I said, in the Web Services API, it lists the ones that are, that you can perform the insert with. So off the top of my head, for instance, users. So I could use the tool to insert users. I'm sorry, the data loader tool to insert users, but there is not an import wizard. Let me verify this.
So there are objects that we cannot load through the browser.
Exactly. So the notice that it says accounts, contacts, leads, and solutions. Those are the standard ones that are supported. And then for any custom object.
For example, documents.
There are many other standard objects. Yeah.
Documents will not be loaded, for example.
What was that?
Documents is another standard object, I think.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not
yeah. So if we take a look here, for instance, in the Web Services Guide, so something that you might be, let's see here, what was the, so I don't see opportunities, although I thought, I know I didn't see campaigns, but so here, here if I wanted to create campaigns, I could do that via the web services. It supports create, update, delete, so on and so forth. Okay? So, but it's a long list. At the end of the day, it's a long list of additional standard objects. So.
Did you say it can update upload documents?
I believe so. So let's go back to document then. So document. All right, so documents are creatable, updatable, queryable. Okay.
Why is there a limitation on those objects? Because those are all tables, right? So with this correct configuration, everything should be imported and exported.
I don't know.
License?
So I just know that the Web Services API is, for the most part, has much greater functionality, much greater flexibility and functionality than browser-based tools.
Is there any objects that even not importable or exportable by the web services?
I don't know. I'm sure there are.
But you don't know why?
I don't know which ones. If there's some standard objects that do not support a create. I know there's things like profiles, for instance. You have to use what's called the metadata API. So profiles, if I go back to here and I take a look at profiles, so maybe it does, update queries. So notice with a profile, I cannot create a profile using the Web Services API. But that being said, we have a different API called the metadata API in which I can identify those. So there's different, certain things qualify as metadata as opposed to data, and so there's, there's different support for different things.
So web services and metadata combined will cover everything?
No, not necessarily.
So there are some things that we cannot...
You're trying to get me to say an absolute statement that I know will get me in trouble in the future. So
you have been being recorded now.
I know, exactly. My point is that there are both use web services, but there's something we call the Web Services API, which is typically operating on what I would refer to as application data. There is another web service API called the metadata API, and the metadata API is for things like profiles and page layouts. So it's not business data or application data. It's metadata that we use within our orgs, and that's a different web service API that we have, and there's a different set of documentation. And from developer.force.com, you can download the Metadata API Developer's Guide. I am sure there is stuff that you cannot do in either case. So I'm sure there's probably a little section in here, things you cannot do. So,
At least custom objects are always.
Custom objects, you're good to go. Yeah, so custom objects have sort of the greatest amount of flexibility in terms of both the wizard and the web services API. So.
One last part was depends on the operations you want to perform. So what are the difference?
There's additional things that you can do, like for instance the web services API doing that upsert with relationships using those external IDs.
So
there's
browser
more.
cannot do that.
Yeah, so the web browser is somewhat limited in terms of doing more of those advanced things. So, all right.
For more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.